Today, we're going to hear an emotionally gripping tale from the American frontier. A native scout and white trapper form an unlikely bond that challenges racial boundaries in 1800s Montana. The harsh winter winds howled across the Montana Territory as Elijah Blackwood trudged through knee-deep snow. December 1878 was proving to be one of the cruelest winters he had experienced in his 15 years as a trapper in these parts. At 42, the lines on his weather-beaten face told stories of survival that few men could match. His once auburn beard was now streaked with gray, matching the leaden skies above. Elijah adjusted the weight of his pack, containing 3 beaver pelts, all he had to show for a week's work. The fur trade wasn't what it used to be, but it was the only life he knew. Since losing his wife Sarah to tuberculosis 5 years prior, the wilderness had become both his refuge and his prison. The snow began falling more heavily, reducing visibility to mere yards. Elijah knew he needed shelter soon. His cabin was still a day's journey away, and nightfall would bring temperatures that could kill a man in hours. He changed course toward a rock formation he remembered from previous expeditions, hoping to find some natural shelter. As he approached the outcropping, his keen eyes spotted something unusual, a faint wisp of smoke rising from behind the rocks. Instinctively, his hand moved to the rifle slung across his back. The territory was generally peaceful these days, but caution had kept him alive this long. Moving silently despite his bulky winter gear, Elijah circled around to investigate. What he found was unexpected. A Native American man, badly wounded, huddled beside a dying fire in a shallow cave. The man was Blackfoot, judging by his clothing, and appeared to be in his early 30s. A deep gash ran along his thigh, crudely bandaged with strips of leather. His breathing was labored, his dark eyes glazed with fever. The wounded man reached weakly for a knife at his side when he noticed Elijah, but lacked the strength to grasp it properly. "I mean no harm," Elijah said, raising his empty palms. He wasn't sure if the man understood English. "You're hurt?" The Blackfoot warrior studied him with wary eyes, then spoke in halting English. 2 days, wolf attack, lost horse, lost blood. He gestured to his leg. "Bad medicine." Elijah nodded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. Without proper care, the wound would likely become gangrenous. The man would die here, alone in this cave. Something within Elijah, perhaps a memory of his own isolation after Sarah's death, compelled him to action. "My name is Elijah Blackwood," he said, slowly removing his pack. "I can help." The wounded man watched cautiously as Elijah built up the fire, then retrieved a small tin from his pack containing a salve of bear fat, pine resin, and herbs, a remedy he'd learned from an old mountain man years ago. "This will hurt," he warned, "but it will clean the wound." The Blackfoot man nodded, bracing himself. He barely flinched as Elijah cleaned and dressed the wound, though beads of sweat formed on his forehead. When the task was complete, Elijah offered his canteen. "What do they call you?" "White settlers call me Joseph," the man replied. After drinking deeply, "My people call me Akacheta. It means fighter." "Well, Akacheta, you're living up to your name," Elijah said, "but you can't travel yet. Night's coming, and that leg needs time." Akacheta nodded grimly. "You do not need to stay. I have survived worse." "Maybe so," Elijah replied, already unpacking his bedroll, "but there's no sense in both of us being stubborn fools tonight." That night, as the temperature plummeted and the wind screamed, outside their shelter, the 2 men shared what little food they had. Akacheta explained that he had been scouting for his people, looking for good hunting grounds for the winter camp, when the wolf pack attacked. His horse had bolted, leaving him stranded with his injury. "My family will be worried," he said, staring into the flames. "My wife, a pony, and my son." "How old is your boy?" Elijah asked. 7 winters," Akacheta replied, a hint of pride warming his voice. Already strong with bow. Elijah nodded, memories of the child he and Sarah had never been. Blessed with flashing through his mind, good age, old enough to learn, young enough to still listen to his father. A ghost of a smile crossed Akacheta's face. Sometimes he listens. As the night deepened, Elijah found himself sharing stories of his own life, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west as a young man seeking fortune, meeting Sarah, and eventually losing her. It had been years since he'd spoken at such length to anyone, let alone about matters so personal. Your woman's spirit walks with you, Akacheta observed quietly. I see it in how you speak of her. Elijah fell silent, unexpectedly moved by the perception of this man from a culture so different from his own. Sometimes I feel her, he admitted, especially out in these mountains. By morning, Akacheta's fever had broken. Though his leg remained swollen and painful, Elijah assessed their situation. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow and a clear, bitter cold day. My cabin is a day's journey north, Elijah said, packing his supplies. You can't walk that far on that leg, and I can't leave you here. Akacheta frowned. I will slow you down. More snow will come. Then we'd better get moving, Elijah replied, fashioning a crude travois from branches and his bedroll. I'm not leaving a man to die when I can help, not anymore. The unspoken weight of those last two words hung between them. Akacheta studied Elijah's face, then nodded once in understanding. Then I owe you a life debt, Elijah Blackwood. Must you owe me nothing, Elijah responded, helping Akacheta onto the travois. Just stay alive so I haven't wasted my time. The journey was grueling. Elijah pulled the travois through deep snow, stopping frequently to rest and check. On Akacheta's condition, they spoke little, conserving energy, though occasionally Akacheta would point out signs that Elijah might have missed, the subtle tracks of a snowshoe hare, the distant cry of an eagle that meant clear weather would hold. By late afternoon, with the winter sun already sinking toward the mountains, Elijah's strength was failing. The constant drag of the travois had taken its toll, and his breath came in painful gasps that crystallized in the frigid air. We must stop, Akacheta said, noting Elijah's struggle. Make camp. Elijah shook his head stubbornly. Cabin's not far. Maybe 2-3 hours. No good shelter here. Are you enjoying our story? Tell us where you're watching our videos from. Leave your city in the comments and let us know what other stories you'd like to hear. Suggest a tale for our next video. They pressed on as daylight faded, the temperature dropping precipitously with the sun. When they finally reached the small log cabin, nestled against a stand of pines, Elijah was nearly delirious with exhaustion. His fingers were too numb to work the simple latch, and Akacheta had to talk him through the motions. Inside, the cabin was cold and dark, but it offered blessed shelter from the wind. Elijah moved on autopilot, lighting a fire in the stone hearth, while Akacheta dragged himself to a rough-hewn chair. Soon, warmth began to fill the single-room dwelling, as feeling returned to his extremities, bringing with it the painful prickling of restored circulation. Elijah surveyed his home through a stranger's eyes. It was spare and functional. A bed against one wall, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserved foods and trapping supplies. A few books, precious possessions in this wilderness, sat on a small shelf beside the bed. The only decorative touch was a faded daguerreotype of Sarah in a simple frame. Your home has strong medicine, Akacheta observed, his eyes taking in the cabin, built with good hands. Elijah nodded, too tired for words, as he prepared a simple meal of jerky softened in hot water with dried beans and the last of his coffee. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling as it drove away the deepest chill. That night, Elijah insisted Akacheta take the bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came fitfully to Elijah. He found himself watchful, not out of distrust, but from the strange sensation of having another person in his space after so many years of solitude. In the pale light of dawn, Elijah woke to find Akacheta already awake, examining the wound. On his leg, the swelling had reduced somewhat, but the gash remained angry and red. "It heals," Akacheta said, looking up as Elijah stirred, but slowly. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed between the two men. Elijah would tend to essential tasks, gathering firewood, checking his nearest trap lines, preparing meals, while Akacheta rested and slowly regained his strength. In the evenings, they would talk, bridging the cultural divide with stories and observations. Elijah learned that Akacheta had fought against white settlers as a young man, but had eventually chosen a path of cautious coexistence after seeing too much bloodshed. He had become a valued scout, sometimes even for the U.S. Army, using his knowledge to help prevent conflicts between his people and the ever-increasing flood of settlers. "My people say I am too friendly with the white eyes," Akacheta admitted one evening. "Your people say I cannot be trusted because I am Blackfoot. I stand between worlds, trusted fully by neither." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "Reckon I understand something of that. When I chose this life, living alone in the wilderness, folks back east called me a savage. The actual natives probably. Think I'm just another intruder. You are an intruder," Akacheta said, with unexpected frankness, though there was no malice in his tone. But you are an intruder who respects the land, not like those who tear open the earth for gold or kill buffalo by the hundreds for their tongues and hides." On the 4th day, as Akacheta demonstrated his improving mobility by walking short distances around the cabin, a new storm began brewing. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains, and the wind took on that particular moan that Elijah recognized as a harbinger of serious weather. "Blizzard coming?" he said, watching the sky through the cabin's single window. "Big one." Akacheta joined him at the window, his face grave. "My family. They will be worried. Our winter camp is 3 days' journey southwest, near the Big Bend in the river." Elijah understood the unspoken concern. If the storm was as severe as it threatened to be, it could last for days, even weeks. By then, Akacheta's family might assume the worst. "You can't travel yet," Elijah said firmly. "Not on that leg, and certainly not in a blizzard." Akacheta's jaw tightened, torn between knowing Elijah was right and his responsibility to his family. But perhaps after the storm passes. The blizzard struck that night with a fury that made the cabin's sturdy logs creak and groan. Snow piled against the door and window, and the two men had to take turns keeping the chimney clear to prevent smoke from backing up into the cabin. For 3 days, the storm raged, effectively sealing them inside except for brief excursions to gather more firewood from the covered stack beside the cabin. During this enforced confinement, their conversations deepened. Akacheta spoke of his people's struggles as their traditional lands and way of life were increasingly threatened. Elijah shared his disillusionment with the civilization he had left behind, its greed, its hypocrisies, its casual cruelties. "And I came west seeking freedom," Elijah confessed, "but sometimes I wonder if I was just running away." "Sometimes running away and seeking freedom are the same thing," Akacheta replied. "The difference is in what you do once you stop running." On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Snow lay deep and pristine, as far as the eye could see, with drifts taller than a man in places. the sun emerged, blindingly bright against the white expanse, creating a beautiful but treacherous world. Akecheta stood outside, testing his weight on his injured leg. It was healing well, but still far from fully mended. "I must return to my people," he said determinedly. "They will think I am dead." Elijah nodded, having expected this. "I'll go with you," he said simply. Akecheta turned to him in surprise. "It is a difficult journey, even without the snow. Your traps." "The traps can wait," Elijah interrupted. "Won't be much moving out there for a while anyway. Besides," he added with a half-smile, "I've never seen a Blackfoot winter camp. Might be educational." The real reason hung unspoken between them. Akecheta still wasn't strong enough to make the journey alone, especially through the deep snow. They both knew it. Preparations took a full day. Elijah gathered supplies, repaired snowshoes for both of them, and cached items he wouldn't be taking. By dawn of the following day, they were ready to depart. The journey was as difficult as anticipated. Even with snowshoes, they sank deep with each step. Progress was painfully slow, and Elijah kept a watchful eye on Akecheta, noting how he favored his injured leg. They made camp in a sheltered grove as darkness fell, having covered perhaps a third of the distance they might have managed in better conditions. That night, huddled close to their small fire, Akecheta suddenly spoke of a memory from his childhood. "When I was a boy, there was an old man in our band. He had lived so long that even the elders called him grandfather. He told stories of the time before horses came to our people, when we followed the buffalo on foot." Elijah listened, captivated by this glimpse into a history that predated written records. "One day," Akecheta continued, "this old man told me something I did not understand then. He said, 'The white man's strength is in his numbers and his hunger. Our strength must be in our wisdom and our patience. The storm does not fight the mountain. It transforms it slowly over many seasons." Akecheta poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I think of his words often now. Our old ways are changing, whether we wish it or not, but perhaps we can shape how they change, if we are wise enough." Elijah considered this. "Seems to me both sides could use more wisdom. I've seen too many fools, white and native alike, who'd rather die fighting than live by adapting. Yet here we are." Akecheta observed quietly, a Blackfoot and a white trapper sharing fire and food. Perhaps this is its own kind of wisdom. The second day of travel brought them to more familiar territory for Akecheta, who now took the lead despite his injury. They followed a frozen stream for several miles, then cut through a narrow pass between towering rock formations. By late afternoon, Akecheta paused atop a rise, pointing to a distant valley. "There," he said, "my people's winter camp is there, by the cottonwoods where the river bends." Even from this distance, Elijah could make out the smoke from multiple fires rising into the clear air. The Blackfoot camp was substantial, perhaps 30 lodges, arranged in the traditional circle, with horses corralled nearby. Akecheta turned to Elijah, his expression suddenly grave. "My people will be suspicious of you. Some may be hostile." Elijah nodded, understanding the warning. "I'll follow your lead. I'm not looking for trouble." "I will tell them you saved my life," Akecheta assured him. "You will be treated as my guest, but be careful with your words and actions. Not all share my views on coexistence." As they approached the camp, they were spotted by sentries. A group of armed warriors rode out to meet them, hands on weapons, faces stern with suspicion. Elijah kept his rifle slung across his back, his empty hands visible. Akecheta called out in his native language, and Elijah could sense the shock and joy in the responding calls. One rider spurred his horse ahead of the others, reaching them first, a young man who bore a clear resemblance to Akecheta. Words flowed rapidly between them, Akecheta gesturing occasionally toward Elijah and his own leg. Finally, the young man, who Elijah guessed was a brother or cousin, approached him cautiously. "My cousin says you saved his life," he said in accented but clear English. "That you pulled him through snow for a day to reach your cabin, then shared your food and medicine." Elijah shrugged uncomfortably. "He would have done the same." The young man studied him intently, then nodded once. "I am Makia. My cousin's wife and son have cried many tears, thinking him dead. For bringing him back to them, you are welcome among us tonight." The welcome at the camp was a mixture of curiosity, gratitude, and lingering suspicion. Children peeked out from behind lodge flaps. Elders watched with inscrutable expressions, and then warriors kept a respectful but vigilant distance. Elijah was acutely aware of being the only white face in a sea of Blackfoot people. The reunion between Akecheta and his family was powerful to witness. His wife, a pony, a woman of striking beauty with long black hair and proud bearing, rushed to embrace him, visibly fighting back tears. Their young son clung to his father's legs, his small face a mixture of joy and lingering fear. Elijah stood awkwardly to the side until Akecheta beckoned him forward. "This is the man who saved my life," he announced in English, presumably for Elijah's benefit. "Elijah Blackwood. He is a good man with a strong heart. He is my brother now." That evening, Elijah was invited to join Akecheta's family for a meal in their lodge. The interior was warm and comfortable, with buffalo robes covering the ground and personal belongings neatly arranged around the perimeter. The central fire cast a golden glow over everything, and the smoke escaped through an opening at the top of the conical structure. A pony served a stew of buffalo meat and wild roots, watching Elijah carefully as he accepted the wooden bowl. With thanks, the boy, whose name was Hanska, stared openly at the stranger, particularly fascinated by Elijah's red-gray beard. "Your husband is a brave man," Elijah said to a pony, unsure what else to say in such an unfamiliar social situation. "Oh, he fought hard to return to you." A pony's dark eyes studied him, then softened slightly. "Akecheta says you have no family waiting for you, that you live alone in the mountains." Elijah nodded, surprised by the personal observation. "My wife passed some years ago. Never had children. That is a heavy burden to carry alone," she said simply, and there was genuine compassion in her voice. Later, as the camp settled for the night, Elijah sat with Akecheta by one of the communal fires. Several elders had joined them, including a man introduced as Black Elk, a respected medicine man. The conversation, conducted in a mixture of Blackfoot, English and sign language, turned to the changing times and uncertain future facing both the Blackfoot people and the frontier itself. The buffalo grow fewer each year. Black Elk said, through Akecheta's translation, "The white man's iron road comes closer. More lodges of wood and stone appear on our hunting grounds. The old ways fade like morning mist." Elijah nodded, unable to deny these truths. "The world is changing faster than anyone can make sense of," he agreed. "Even for white folks, the old certainties are disappearing. Yet here you sit, a white trapper among us as a friend," Black Elk observed. "Perhaps this is a sign that not all change brings destruction." The conversation continued late into the night, touching on practical matters of survival, philosophical questions of identity and adaptation, and personal stories that transcended cultural differences. Elijah found himself speaking more openly than he had in years, drawn out by the genuine interest and surprisingly compatible worldviews of these men he had been raised to consider savages. As the fire burned low and others drifted away to their lodges, Akecheta and Elijah remained, watching the embers glow. Tomorrow you will return to your cabin, Akacheta asked. Elijah nodded. Should get back to my trap lines. Winter won't last forever. I have been thinking, Akacheta said carefully. The territory between your cabin and our winter hunting grounds, it is rich with beaver and marten. Perhaps there is a way we could work together. Elijah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What did you have in mind? My people are skilled hunters, but we have limited access to trade for the goods we need. You have direct connections to the trading posts. Akacheta leaned forward. If we bring you furs, you could trade them along with yours. We would share in what they bring. Ammunition, tools, blankets. It would benefit both. Elijah considered the proposal. It made practical sense, but would also place him in an unusual position, a white man acting as intermediary for Blackfoot traders. Some at the trading posts might view it with suspicion or hostility. It wouldn't be without risk, he said, slowly, for either of us. Life without risk is no life at all, Akacheta replied with a slight smile. But think on it. The winter is long, and there will be time to decide. The next morning, Elijah prepared to depart. Akacheta insisted on accompanying him for the first few miles, despite his family's obvious reluctance to see him leave again so soon. Before they left, a pony approached Elijah with a small bundle wrapped in soft-tanned hide. For your journey, she said simply, handing it to him. Inside, Elijah found pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, fat and berries that would keep for months and provide substantial nourishment. It was a thoughtful and practical gift, all the more meaningful coming from a woman who had initially regarded him with such caution. Thank you, he said, meeting her eyes directly. This means more than I can say. As they walked away from the camp, Akacheta moved with greater ease than during their journey in, his leg clearly benefiting from rest and proper care. They traveled in companionable silence for a time, each man absorbed in his thoughts. Finally, at a natural stopping point where their paths would diverge, they paused. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, unused to farewells. Well, I reckon, this is where we part ways. For now, Akacheta agreed, but I meant what I said about working together. I will come to your cabin when the moon is full again, if you are agreeable. Elijah nodded, surprised by how much he welcomed the prospect. I'll keep the fire going. Akacheta extended his hand in the white man's custom of farewell, which Elijah grasped firmly. Until the full moon, my friend. Until then, Elijah replied, feeling the weight of a promise that somehow transcended their differences. As he watched Akacheta walk back toward his people, Elijah felt something shift within him, a recognition that the boundaries he had drawn around his solitary existence were perhaps more permeable than he had believed. The prospect of connection, however unexpected its form, beckoned like a distant light in the wilderness. Turning toward his cabin, Elijah Blackwood began the journey home, carrying with him more than just the practical gift of pemmican. He carried the first fragile strands of what might become a bridge between worlds, his and Akacheta's, past and future, isolation and community. In the days that followed, as he resumed his trapping routines, Elijah found himself anticipating the full moon with an eagerness that surprised him. The cabin, which had for years been merely a shelter, began to feel different as he made small improvements, repairing a loose shutter, building a second chair, clearing space for potential visitors. One evening, as he sat by his fire reading one of his precious books, Elijah realized he was no longer reading for escape, but for connection, thinking about stories he might share, ideas that might bridge the gap between his world and Akacheta's. The wilderness around him, long his refuge from humanity, now seemed like a shared territory, full of possibilities for cooperation rather than merely survival. When the full moon finally rose, Bright and clear over the snow-covered landscape, Elijah stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching the trail that led from the southwest. He had a pot of coffee brewing and fresh venison stew simmering on the fire. Whether Akacheta came alone or with others, whether their tentative plan for cooperation flourished or faltered, Elijah knew that something fundamental had changed in his life's course. The borders of trust, like the territories on maps, could be redrawn, and sometimes it took a wounded scout and a solitary trapper to begin the process.